Hello, in this video we are going to talk about cues. Let's get to it. So, sorry about the delay. I am going to be planning out a whole bunch of videos just to end off the year and also transitioning into next year's content. So we're actually going to be doing slightly different concepts as well as going into actual code next year. So stay tuned for those future updates. But today, let's actually talk about cues. And that is something that we all technically already use throughout our whole entire lives, but we can also see how we can use it inside of our programming language. And for this next few topics, this is actually going to be the winter theme and the holiday theme, and we're actually going to end off the year with some advanced data structures. And with some advanced data structures, these are something that may or may not be already implemented in your programming language, but there are inside of them, or the concept is still around for you to work with them as well. So we'll be talking about stacks and also queues, trees, linked lists, and then sets. These are the main ones I want to talk about, but there are some other ones like maps, which is technically like hashes, and we already did hashes in a whole nother video. There are also other advanced structures that we can talk about, but these are the main ones that I seem to use a lot throughout the whole entire programming field. So we'll each have some of these topics explained through a different series of videos, and we are also going to be implementing them and also seeing the difference between some of them. So that is going to be the next set of structures that we are going to be discussing. And I'm also super excited to be doing this holiday theme. It has been planned for a few months now, and I'm actually going to be now implementing it, which is super exciting. So we'll have a lot of holiday theme lectures and videos, as well as some Instagram posts coming out soon too, just for the holiday season and also the winter season. So this theme will actually continue on up until next year as well. But the main topic for today is going to be about queues. And that will be the first advanced data structure of what we will be covering. But first off, let's see what is a queue. So a queue is actually a data type to list out data objects, and then we are going to be processing each of the objects by a particular order. And we actually in real life already encountered queues inside of our everyday interactions, such as when we are waiting in line for holiday shopping or waiting in line to go on a particular ride. That is technically also called a queue as well, is where you're just lining up and then you're processing through whoever comes at a particular order, not randomly. It's all formatted at a particular set of field. And the order I am going to be talking about is called FIFO. FIFO is actually the first in, first out particular order. And what that means is that whoever's in the front of the line actually gets processed first versus whoever's in the back of the line. But then once the person is processed, it will then go into the next person and then the next person all throughout the whole entire line or whatever the list is. So that is the order that queues are working with. And one of the main features of queues is the first in, first out ordering that it uses. So if you take a look inside of here, you can actually see over to the left side of people lining up for a particular line. And the first person in front, that is who is going to be processed first versus the one in the very back, right? That's just how things are. That's just how FIFO works, is whoever's in the front line gets dealt with first, and then it goes through from there. So after that particular person is done, then it goes on to the next one, and then the next, until it goes through all of the particular people. And again, we're experiences as we check out for cashiers, and when we are going in line for like a roller coaster, and all other things inside of our lives. We're just putting a name to what we are doing, which is a queue. Now, the next thing is why do we even need a queue? And the main thing is for organization. If you just have a bunch of people or a bunch of data come at you all at once, it might be hard to process and you might be overwhelmed. Same thing goes with the computer. If you get a bunch of processes, a bunch of data thrown at it, it doesn't know what to do or where to start. So when we are putting everything in a queue, it actually has a much more organized place to go from where you should start off with. And that's one of the main features of a particular queue is organization. The other one is the FIFO process, something that we already talked about. It's the first in, first out, right? So that means that whoever is there first, they will get processed or dealt with first. And that is a much more fair order than just having it randomly or when it's just having it as the person in the back, things like that. Because what the FIFO processes or how we are going to be handle certain things is whoever gets there first gets processed first. So that is another reason why we're using queues. And also it deals with speed. When you have a bunch of data points thrown at things at once, it might be hard and it might drag down your machine because again it's trying to figure out where to start. And with the queue, it actually cleans that up and it knows where to start. It knows to start at the very front and it knows where to start at the very beginning. So it actually speeds up a few of the processes a lot. And depending on the particular process, it could be relatively fast or short. It depends on whatever is there first. And this is really good for handling a lot of information. I wouldn't recommend you using queue if there's only like one or two. I would still use the FIFO, like whoever gets there first, but then a queue would be a super overkill for that particular data type or to handle that particular situation. A queue is mostly and actually is much more efficient when it's dealt with a huge amount of data. If you have a bunch of orders coming in or a bunch of customers or a bunch of things that you have to handle, a queue is actually a really good part for you to handle things. And it's one of your tools that you can have in your arsenal. Now let's actually talk about implementation. So there's a few ways that you can implement it, and it also depends on your programming language. Some programming languages does have a queue data structure, and others they don't, but you can implement them with other things that the programming language do have. So it really depends on if it does have it or not, whether it's a high or low language. It may or may not have a particular queue data structure already made inside of the programming language. But for some of them, you may have to implement them with what you have. And something that most programming languages have that you can use as a queue is actually an array. Because an array is just a list of objects. And if we treat an array like a queue, then it could also be a queue as well. So that is the other way that you can implement a queue is with the array. And there's also a bunch of ways that you can implement queues. These are probably the most common or most efficient ones is with a queue and an array. But if you have any other suggestions of how you can implement a queue in a particular programming language, please list them down below in the comments, and I'd love to hear your feedback about them. So let's say that the programming language that you're using does have a particular data type of a queue. Then that means that you don't have to implement anything else. You can just use that queue object or queue class or whatever it is that you have inside of your programming language. So with that in mind, you can just use that for a queue. And it's pretty simple. In most cases, it will be creating a new queue. So you can do queue.new, set it to a variable, and you're able to add on into the queue and then also take things off at the beginning of the queue, because the queue, you can't take things off at the end because of the ordering, right? The ordering is first in, first out. If you want to process items in the queue correctly, it will have to be the first item that got there inside of the queue. So with this in mind, here is a little bit of example of a particular queue that we're using. So let's say for Santa Claus, he wants to load up all of his reindeer inside of his sleigh. And he can't just load them up all at once just because he's just one person, he's just Santa, right? He wants them at a particular order. That way it's easier for them to get loaded up and also comfortable. So let's say that we need to create a queue to help Santa load up his sleigh with all of his reindeer. So with that, our queue is actually called sleigh. And the first reindeer that we are going to be loading up is going to be Dasher. And within the sleigh itself, Dasher will be hooked on into the sleigh first. And then it will be the second reindeer, which is going to be Dancer. And Dancer will be loaded up into the sleigh next, but after Dasher because of the particular order. And when everything is done, when Christmas is all over, you would have to go ahead and unload the particular reindeer out of particular order, or else they will get tangled and it won't be a quick way to remove items. So you would have to go ahead and remove whoever was there first. It might be as simple as doing like a dot shift or dot remove for the queue, and that would remove the first reindeer, which is going to be Dasher. So Dasher would then go ahead and leave the sleigh once everything is done, when it does come down to it. And that's how a queue would work, is that you are creating a new queue, you can load it up, and when you are processing it or removing things, it would be whoever was there first. In this case, Dasher was there first at the sleigh, so then he would actually be the first one to be removed from the sleigh once the sleigh is done. Now let's go into another implementation, that is with arrays. And with arrays is a little bit slightly different, because arrays, it just lists out and hold particular objects. So you would have to treat it like a queue for it to be very similar to a queue. And what I mean by that is that I need to have it follow the FIFO ordering, right? Whoever goes in first will also be removed first or be processed first. And that is how I'm going to be treating the array here, and to make it really similar to a queue. So here, instead of using a queue, I'm actually using something like an array. And you can load up the array with a Prancer and Vixen, and whoever gets there first, that is who is going to be removed first. So since Prancer was already in the array and added on into the array, and then Vixen is right behind him, so then he is right next to Prancer, so he's actually going to be second. So once it is done and we are removing the reindeer, Prancer is actually going to be removed first because of the first in, first out. So that is what we are going to be doing with this array, is that we're going to be removing whoever was in first, which is going to be Prancer, or the first item within the array. And from there, you probably also notice that everything also shifts from there. What I mean by this is that if you take a look inside of the bottom example here, Prancer is inside of the array, and he has an index or position of 0, which is the first element within the array. And then when we add in Vixen, Prancer is still going to be the 0 position, and then Vixen is going to be the index of 1, so the second position. So when we are removing Prancer at that point in time, all of the stuff that is still inside of the queue will be shifted over by the index value as well. So it will still be removing the first element first. So now, since we are removing Prancer, Vixen's index is now 0. So then he is next up in line to be removed from the queue. And that is how it will work within an array, and also following the FIFO ordering when the first in, first out is going to be implemented. And again, this is just 2 ways that you can implement it. There are a lot of ways that you can implement a queue, but these are the most common ones that you are able to use. Now let's actually go into some live examples, because with reindeer and all of the other things, we won't be using that everyday life, right? But some live examples of where we would be using queues is probably online ordering, such as if you're ordering for food or if you're ordering for packages for Christmas. It does follow a particular queue. It is the first in, first out. So if you're ordering something that is from a particular store, then whoever is there first will get their order first and get their stuff shifted out first. And then whoever is next, it will then go on to the next person and the next person, and it will go through all of the orders until all of the orders are fulfilled. And that is the FIFO queue ordering that some of the orders are using. The other one is like if we are purchasing tickets, so a ticket to a train or a ticket to a cruise or a plane, it does follow a particular queue, right? You need to be able to go in a single line, and whoever is there first, they will get processed first, they'll get seated first, or they'll get their tickets first, right? Those are all examples of a queue, and we can implement that in our code when we are building out a store or an online ticketing system, we would have to process those orders and those tickets in a queue, or else it would kind of seem off, right? Some customers, they would get their tickets first, even though that they barely signed in or they barely bought it, versus someone that would have to wait for a long time, even though that they were the first one on the site. So this really helps make things a lot more fair, a lot more better ordering, and a realistic order. And that is going to be queues. And that pretty much sums up queues. If you like it, click the like button below and don't forget to subscribe. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to post it down in the comments. And I will see you in the next video. See ya.